Good evening, everyone. It's truly an honor to have you all here tonight as we celebrate the author who means so much to all of us, not just as booksellers, but as spirit people who turn to stories for hope, joy, and resilience. TJ Klune has a remarkable gift. Through his words, he builds worlds where queer love, found family, and magic, whether literal or simply in the magic of human connection, shine at the heart of the stories. His books remind us that we deserve softness, adventure, and happy endings. In a time when queer communities facing uncertainty, hostility, and censorship, authors like TJ are more important than ever. His stories aren't just for entertainment, they are acts of defiance, celebration, and of radical joy. Tonight, we're here to celebrate his latest book, The Bones Beneath My Skin. What a great sentence I have to hear over and over again, TJ. Thank you. It's a story that blends sci-fi, tenderness, and the power of human and extraterrestrial connection in a way that only TJ can. Also, there's a lot of bacon in the book. His work has been a guiding light for so many of us, and for our bookstore who has been lucky enough to witness the impact that they had on readers of all ages. And tonight we're also joined by Kim Fu, who holds a special place in our bookstore's history and in my mission as the conversation partner for our very first author event that we held in early 2024, I think. And Kim is the author of 2 novels, a collection of poetry, and most recently, the story collection Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century, winner of the Washington State Book Award, among many other prizes. Stories in that collection have been selected for the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy and Best of the Net, performed on Levar Burton Reads, that's super cool, and selected shorts, and options for TV and film. Woo! And no big deal. Their third novel, The Valley of Vengeful Ghosts, is forthcoming from Tit House in 2026. So please join me in giving a warm, love-filled welcome to the incredible, incomparable TJ Klune and Kim Fu.
Thank you again to Charlie and Jane for that very warm and loving introduction. So I'm very excited to get to talk to you about this book. It's a romance novel, it is a road trip novel, it is a paranormal adventure thriller action with gunfights and explosions. It is a very human and loving story of found family. It is so many incredible moving parts, and so I want to go back to the very first seed of inspiration for a book this complex.
Yeah.
What is the very first thing that came to you? What the first origin?
Okay, so in 2015, I had this idea. I wanted to write a book that was in the vein of a specific kind of trope, where there are a group of children or young people in an adult novel who are imperiled somehow. Think Stephen King's It, or think Robert McCammon's Boy's Life. Something like that, where a group of children have to face something. So I was like, oh, cool. What if I had this group of boys? One of them, maybe 2 of them would be queer, and it was going to be set in the 80s, and they were going to have to protect a little girl who had supernatural abilities somehow. And I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to let that cook in the back of my head for a little bit. And then in 2016, this stupid show called Stranger Things came out, and I was like, screw you guys. So yes, if I had originally written the book as I wanted to, it would have been Stranger Things. And so I was like, oh man. So I knew there was something there. I knew that there was something there, but I just had to figure out how to do something with it. And so I just let it sit in the back of my head. Now, have any of you read a book called The House in the Cerulean Sea? Yeah. Okay. You guys should know that The Bones Beneath My Skin and The House in the Cerulean Sea were written back to back. When you meet Artemis, Darth Vader, the 10-year-old at the center of The Bones Beneath My Skin, you're going to think, could she belong on the island for a little bit? She is a precursor to what the kids in the islands would eventually become. But I'm going to go back a little bit. So, Stranger Things comes out, I'm mad, I get over it. I watch it, it's okay, whatever. Except for Chief Hopper, I love him, and I will never. So I let it cook, I let it sit in the back of my head, and then out of nowhere, I was watching something on Instagram. And I was scrolling through it, and a face popped up from my childhood that I had totally forgotten about. A face that if you know this person's name, or if you go to look up online afterwards, you will know why this face is embedded into so many of a psyche of a certain generation. If you came of age, or if you were alive in the 90s, you probably remember something called Heaven's Gate. Marshall Applewhite, for those not in the know, was a cult. Marshall Applewhite was their cult leader. Now, Marshall Applewhite cuts a very strange figure. When you look at the videos, because he recorded all of these videos online and posted them about his work and everything that he does, or that he did. And he is, imagine if E.T. had a baby with a human being. Marshall Applewhite would be that E.T. human being baby. He has very dark tan skin, shaved, and his ears stick out really, really far. And he has the most intense eyes out of anybody that I've ever seen. They don't look dead, but they are alive in ways that are not quite right. So I became very, what fascinates me is not the cult itself, but the psychology behind the cults. How can a charismatic person suddenly take over the will of so many people? So what Heaven's Gate whole deal was, and here's another fun fact. When you get done here, go to heavensgate.com. When you leave tonight, it is the exact same website that was there in the 90s. It looks like a GeoCities hellscape. There's like flash stuff going on, it's neon and stuff like that. It's not active, but it's there as like a museum piece. I talked to the people who run that website when I was writing this book in 2017, because I wanted to know what it was like. What was Marshall Applewhite like? What was he this? So what did they believe? Well, in the mid-90s, a comet called Hale-Bopp was coming to the Milky Way, was coming to go and pass by Earth. It was bright, it was beautiful, it was huge. And when it passed, it would go back and disappear for 1,000, 2,000 years, something like that. Heaven's Gate believed that there was an alien spaceship in the tail of the comet, and that when the comet passed by the Earth, they were going to ascend into the spacecraft and be taken away from this earthly plane. How did they do this? Mass suicide. So they all wore tracksuits, Nike tracksuits. You'll probably remember, if you're of that time, you'll remember the indelible images of the aftermath with all of these people laying in bunk beds in these bunkers covered in white sheets. And you could see their feet sticking out in the blue of the tracksuits. So it stuck out to me, the psychology behind that. Think about a little bit further back, you had Jim Jones in Jonestown. You had David Koresh in Waco. In a certain way, you had Ted Kaczynski, who was a cult of his own. So what I find fascinating, again, is not that cults exist, or that the evil that they purport to do that some do, or that the fact of what they believe in. That's almost ancillary to me to the psychology. Like, how does a person do that? How can a person be so charismatic, have such a way with how they present their ideas to the world, that everybody is like, okay, you can have my money and my life, I'll cut out all of my family, I cut out all of my friends, and I will do whatever you tell me to do. And that eventually leads to these unfortunate incidents where, in the case of Heaven's Gate, they all died. An unfortunate part about being an author, this is a long story to make this short, a fortunate part about being an author is 2 words: what if? So, after I discovered Marshall Applewhite, and after that whole thing came flooding back, I was like, oh man, oh, but wait, what if they were right? What if something happened? And why did I want to set it in the 90s? Here's a very cool reason. Think about the beginning of the 90s. Nobody had cell phones. Nobody had internet. At the end of that decade, almost every person, at least in this country, had a cell phone. the very end of that decade in this country, almost everybody had internet to the point where we thought we were all going to die because of something called Y2K. If you don't know what that was, boy, if you're too young to know what that is, or that you missed that, you missed a hell of a good time, man. It was insane. But I posit that the 90s were the biggest technological leap that we have ever seen in terms of human connection, for better or worse. Because with this ability to be on the internet, we can talk to people in countries and cultures that we might never experience on our own. That also means that people who are crazy can go online and talk to other crazy people. You want a real-life example of what that looks like? It's called QAnon. That's what happened. They are essentially a cult who were connected by the internet. So there's this power behind this idea of the 90s being this weird and crazy time. And I can't believe I'm still talking.
Like 10 things I wanted to ask you.
Yay!
We will ping back to a lot of that.
Okay, cool.
But
Yeah, so basically it started out as Stranger Things, and then I joined a cult, kind of.
and we're all the luckier for it. That has evolved from Stranger Things to your fascination with the psychology of cults and 90s comics and the technological evolution.
Yes.
We have, it has resulted in a rich novel for it.
In case you can't tell, I have ADHD.
So when I look back on reading it, this is point one of the 10 things that you brought up that I want to talk about. When I look back at reading it, one of the things that really sticks with me is Artemis's voice. Artemis, the little girl who is maybe not everything she seems.
Right.
And like the way she speaks, the way she observes the world, the way she learns and she takes things in, it was like one of my favorite things about the book. And
Thank you.
I would love to know more about the development of her character and of that voice.
So I look, as you all know from The House in the Cerulean Sea, Somewhere Beyond the Sea, I like writing the kids that are curious about the world, that what to ignore or what to explore, what things mean. Not necessarily because, oh, hi, I love your Chauncey. Not necessarily, oh, your Chauncey sweatshirt. Holy Chauncey mega fan, all right. I wanted to let kids be kids in The House in the Saroyan Sea. There's a line that I've crossed before that I try to be better at, but how many of you have read a book, has a child character, then all of a sudden that child character opens their mouth and they sound like a 40-year-old man. And you're like, that's not how children speak. That's not how kids speak. Because at some point you make them too precocious. You make them little adults. So there was a fine line that I wanted to walk with art because A, she is a kid in a way, but she's also something else that has the curiosity that we have in childhood. Think about when you're kids and you're exploring the world and you're going out and learning everything that's new. Everything is like a sensory experience. But now imagine, say any one of you was plucked from this world and dropped on an alien planet where things existed, flora, fauna, fruit, whatever, food, anything that you can imagine. Wouldn't you be interested in every single thing that's different? I would be fascinated by the plants, by the animals, by the fish in the ocean, in the waters, by the trees, all this kind of stuff. That's what I wanted to instill into art, is that if you were not of a place and you were sent to that place, what would that look like through your eyes? Would it be the big things or would it be the little things that would mean the most? And to me, I've always felt that the little details matter just as much, if not more, than the big picture. And I love putting little details in the book to give the book a more visceral, lush, cinematic experience. But I also wanted to make sure with art that I was leading the reader as she saw things. Yes, Nate is the main character of this book, but Nate, Alex, and Artemis are the three main characters. They are almost all on every single page. There could not be Nate and Alex without art. There could not be Art and Alex without Nate. It's just they are three pieces of a puzzle that may not go to the same picture, but when you put it together, it still fits. And art is their curiosity. Art is the wonder in the world that these two people have lost. Because when the book opens, they're both broken, defeated people, and they get to see the wonder of somebody who is not that way, that sees things differently.
So on that note, I had seen you say in another interview that it was really important to you that the relationship between Nate and Alex develop in a way that felt like a real relationship and not just trauma bonding.
Oh,
as they're
good,
going through all this,
yeah.
you know, all this like very, very difficult, extreme situations together.
Yeah.
And I want to hear more about your thoughts on that, about that distinction.
Yeah,
and
so
how you do that on the page.
How many of y'all have seen like an action movie where the guy gets the girl, they go through some big, huge, horrific thing, and at the very end they're like, we're in love, and then they walk away, and you're like, well, do you even like each other? Like, what do you know about each other, man? Like, I mean, when you watch like in like one of those big action movies, you don't think, oh, that's a love that's gonna last all night. Unless it was gay people in the action movie, then that will last a lifetime. When you think about how much better Die Hard would have been if Bruce Willis got a boyfriend.
Not entirely not what this book is.
Yeah. I wanted to write a queer action movie, because I totally like that. But, what were we talking about? The relationship. Right. But think about it. In this book, these characters go through something life-altering. Nate has his entire world shifted, his entire worldview. Alex and Art have been there, so now they know what Nate is going through to a certain extent, but they do not know Nate. They do not know what he's been through. And you get to hear about that in the opening pages. Nate is beaten down. There's a lot of stuff that has gone wrong. Some are his mistakes. He made some very unethical choices in his job. Some are family related. A pretty horrific tragedy happened in his background. And I have to have, anytime I write any kind of romantic relationship, whether it be Arthur and Linus in the house in the Cerulean Sea or something more intense, something more intense, like say with Victor and Hap in The Lives of Puppets. Something that is this, it has to feel organic. It has to feel earned. I know there's some people out here, and I'm speaking to the quote unquote romance readers, who are like, slow burn, ew. Slow burn is my fucking jam, man. Like, if I want these characters to get together, you can bet they'll get together, but it'll probably be at like the very end of the book. Like, okay, here we go, because they have to have a basis. First they have to have an introduction. Then they have to have a reason to be near each other. And then they have to have a reason to actually trust a little bit. And that doesn't even get to start to liking them as an individual, as a person, and then going from that step to liking them as something more, to that step to seeing them as something vital into this group. And it's a very tricky line to walk. Because I thought a lot about that word, that phrase, trauma bonding. Because that is a very real thing that happens. People go through something traumatic together and it does create this bond, but is that a bond that could last? And maybe it does or maybe it doesn't, but I wanted to take very specific care with any time that the book itself or the narrative approaches Nate and Alex in a relationship lens that it's earned, and that it feels right for what is going on in the book. Because let's face it, half the book, these people are on the run. It's not gonna be like, this is so romantic. We just blew up a bunch of people. Isn't that lovely? You know? So I have to think about, is this something that would I see these characters lasting? And let me say this, if Art was not there, I don't know, maybe. But Art is there because she is the third necessary piece of this triangle. She's not involved, obviously not involved with the romantic relationship, but she is part and parcel part of them. And that's why it was important for that to feel that way.
Those scenes of the two of them, or more often the three of them, like having like these quiet moments like together, these like stretches to get to know each other and sort of build routine together, you know, make coffee, live their lives together, versus the scenes where there's like big action sequences, explosions, death. Like, do you approach those differently on a writing level? Like, do those feel different to you in terms of process?
They do, because with like the opening, let's take it back to, I think a good comparison to the Bones Beneath My Skin's opening section is equivalent to, say, the opening section of In the Lives of Puppets, where I want to give you this world. I want you to feel this world. I want you to live in this world with these characters for a certain amount of time, because when hits the fan, I actually want you to care about them. I actually want you to care about them, not as individuals per se, but yes, that's wonderful too. But again, as that triangle, as that trio. So when the big stuff starts happening, I want you to feel like, yes, they need all three of them. All three of them have to go. If they got rid of Nate, they're gone. If Alex says no, nothing will happen. If Art goes, nothing's going to happen. You know, if Alex goes, nothing's going to happen. It has to be all three of them. And so that's why I love that long, extended idle at the beginning where you can soak it in and get to learn them before I take it all away. Sorry, that was not an evil laugh. You can't quote me on the, oh, it's on TV.
Yeah, I think your evil laugh is
Yeah.
So speaking of that early idyll, and you mentioned atmospheric detail. So one of the first really important settings in the book is in rural Oregon, and I just learned that you were coming from Leavenworth today, and
Yeah.
we're in the Seattle Public Library, and I was wondering about your relationship to the landscape, because I did feel like the Pacific Northwestiness of it was also important, like in the details of it, the blackberry
Yeah.
lake and the
Yeah, I was born and raised in a little town called Roseburg, Oregon. If you, oh yeah, the people who know that know why we're laughing a little bit, huh? Yeah. So in the 80s and 90s, Roseburg was known as the meth capital of Oregon. Hooray! I grew up in a very, very poor, very impoverished home who did not like me one whit because, why? Because I knew I was queer by the time I was 10 years old. I also had undiagnosed ADHD, so I was like a little swishy and wouldn't shut up and all of that. So, but there were summers that all we had to eat were blackberries that were out in the bushes that surround the house. There were summers where all I would do was go into the woods and not come out until the afternoon. I'd take a book or I'd take a notepad to go in and write. Summers where I would ride the bike into town, into Roseburg, because we lived outside of Roseburg in an even tinier little conclave called Melrose. And so I literally had to ride my bike into town 5 miles to get to the library. And I would spend every day during the summer there in the library reading books and stuff like that. So I know the Pacific Northwest. So many of my books are set there because the K&W is in my bones. It absolutely is in my bones. I am born and raised, even though I came from straight up trailer trash, even though I am straight up trailer trash, how I grew up. I came from a redneck family. I came from a family of loggers. And every man in my family above me was a logger. They had lived and died by logging and everything like that. So I knew what it felt like to be in that kind of area at this very specific time period because I was there. I lived it. All those descriptions of Oregon in the beginning of this book are there because that's what I experienced when I was a kid.
That really comes through.
Yeah.
I was going to say immediately, who is your Louis L'Amour? But I feel like I have to explain.
Yeah.
Art and Nate bond over a shared love of these Westerns, written by Louis L'Amour, and it becomes like a shared language between them, and like a big part of kind of art's interpretation of the world too, in a way that's really fun. And yeah, I was wondering if there were books and an author that played that role for you.
Like, again, this is a good thing to be talking about being the 80s and 90s because like too many people of my generation, I read Stephen King at far too young an age. The very first book I read of Stephen King's was The Stand, the complete and uncut edition when I was 11 years old. I did not understand 90% of that book, but what I did know was that I was enthralled by it. I did not know words could do that. I did not know words could be put in that order to make people feel this certain things. I didn't know words could be ugly like that and show gross, horrific things. So what did that happen from? I've read everything Stephen King has ever put out multiple times. I will continue to read it. He has a new book coming out like in May, I think. Long live the king, man. 70-something years old and still writing books, 1 or 2 a year. Jesus Christ, I hope I'm that prolific when I get to be that age. But he is, okay.
Almost no one is as prolific as you are at your age, to be clear.
Yeah. But, so, like, Stephen King is not important to me. See, like, I don't write in horror yet. But Stephen King is because, look, whatever else you can say, let's remove the horror from Stephen King for a moment. Let's talk about a book like Needful Things. The small town felt real. Castle Rock feels like a real place. Derry feels like a real place. Why? Because he spends time building them up as real places. Now, do they all need to be 1,000 pages long? No. No. But that sense of feeling the dirt under your fingernails when you're walking with the characters, that's what I want. That's what Stephen King taught me, is that not everything, that sometimes horror doesn't have to come from monsters, it can come from humans. And it could be just as horrific, but also that there's loveliness in slow moments, in slowing down and letting something breathe and getting to know the characters, or the neighbor. In Stephen King's case, here's a side character that'll be in like 3 chapters and it'll never appear again, but you got to know every single thing about them. And I love that. I love those little side missions into all these other things. And look, if you, has anybody here read Louis L'Amour? The Westerns by Louis L'Amour? Okay, look, I'm gonna tell you what they are, all right? Louis L'Amour had a very specific set of stories that he liked to tell. And he told them over and over and over and over and over again. And I ate them up like freaking crack, man. It was insane. There's always a guy, a gunslinger of some kind, who has to either save a town, a valley, has to fight off banditos somehow. There's always a girl, and it always ends with the gunslinger getting his way. It's not Lonesome Dove, which is, I think, the best Western ever written. It's not Lonesome Dove, but Louis L'Amour had a style that's basically like popcorn. You finish each book is 200 pages or less. You finish it, you're not full. You think, I could go for another one, and you know it's going to be the same thing, but you're going to do it anyway. Why? Because you're not full. And then pretty soon, it's like you've read off like, I don't know, 75 or whatever many books he's written, and it's all the same story, but it doesn't matter because it's Louis L'Amour and it's popcorn. And I love those Westerns. So I wanted to put my love of Louis L'Amour, because I think he's, granted, obviously by the reaction from this audience, that he's kind of forgotten at this point. He's not, I don't know if he's as well remembered as I think he should be. Louis L'Amour is one of the greatest Western novelists who did a very specific thing.
I'm sure a solid percentage will go home and look them up now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Read any one of the books. It does not matter. Pick one. It'll be the same thing as you get through the entire catalog. It's perfect.
You mentioned in the Greek room that you might want to write a Western. And you
Yeah.
said it's now, like horror, not yet.
Yeah. Oh God, I want to do so many. I have an idea for a queer Western that is so freaking cool. I just need to sit down and write it, and also figure out how to not be really, really like step on toes, because I'm a white dude, and you can't write Westerns like Louis L'Amour wrote Westerns then, because look, some of it, like those old cartoons now that get played on HBO, they're like, this doesn't reflect the period of the times now. Louis L'Amour's books are kind of like that. So I would want to take extraordinary care with what I'm doing as a white dude, writing about Western times when, white dudes were like, hey, we're cool, and everybody else is like, oh, shit. So, yeah.
I mean, that care makes it all the more.
Right? Yeah.
I want to ask you about the title.
Yeah.
So it does come up like textually
Uh-huh.
a couple times, but I was interested in kind of its broader thematic meaning to you, and
Yeah.
also like when in the process you landed on it, like when you were like, yes, this is the title.
Okay, so this is going to be. Before I came here today, when I was just getting in my hotel room, I was taking a break, and I was looking at Instagram, and this Instagram reel came up with a teacher teaching her young kids. She handed out M&Ms to the kids and said to the kids, she was just filming herself, so no kids were on camera or anything like that. And she goes, "Okay, everybody, now listen. Everybody that has the blue M&M is the best person in the room." And the blue M&M kids were like, "Yes, I'm the best person in the room." And then she asked the other kids, they had to be 4 or 5 years old, who had a red M&M, and they raised their hand, and she goes, "How did that make you feel to hear that?" And they're sad. You hear kids in the back and going, sad, mad. You hear one kid eating his M&M. And so she goes, "Okay, I want you to take a bite. Look what's on the inside. What color is it?" Long story short, she wanted them to know it's not about what's on the outside. It's about what's on the inside. That is a trivial lesson that you think, yes, obviously she's teaching that to young people, to kids. Why is it so hard for adults to do that? Why is it so hard for adults to not understand it's not necessarily what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside? Because why? We all have the same things on the inside. We all look exactly the same on the inside. If you died, probably one of the few straight people in the audience, if one of you straight people died, and they look at your corpse, they're going to be like, oh yeah, he was a flaming homo. That's not how it works. And I don't understand, now more than ever, I can't believe we have to keep having to have this conversation now in 2025 when it just seems like things are getting worse and worse, and people are becoming full-fledged Nazis at this point. Why does what we look like, what the color of our skin is, who we love, why does any of that matter? You are here for literally the smallest blink of an eye in the human timeline, and that's what you care about? That's what you're angry about? I don't understand why we put so much, or not us, okay, we're all obviously amazing, but why people put so much stock in going after, let's say, I don't know, trans kids. Why do we have to what the hell? Who the hell do these people think they are? Who the hell do these people think they are in states where they changed laws for one kid who was just trying to play a sport? They changed entire state laws all because of one trans kid trying to play a sport. Adults, we should be so much smarter than we are showing ourselves to be. The bones beneath my skin was always about how the fact that nothing else matters, that no matter where we come from, even if it's across the universe itself, we are all made of the same exact things. Because at the end of the day, every single one of you is here because you're made of stardust. That's essentially what it is. And why is it that we don't think about that more? Why don't we think about the miraculousness of our existence? We live in a universe that we don't know if there's anything else out there. Does that make us feel lonely? Could you imagine the Earth out of everything in the universe? Infinite space, and we're the only ones there? Doesn't that make you feel lonely? But doesn't that also make you think, well, maybe I should give a shit about other people in this world? Maybe I should actually care about other people. Maybe I should speak up when I see other people being downright jackasses. It's all about, that's why the bones beneath my skin, that's why I landed on that title, and it was not until Art said that I knew that was going to be the title.
I think we're going to move into the ice questions. So I'm going to ask you one more question that you've kind of teed up while the mice get running.
Okay.
Which is, like, you've already touched on this with kind of almost every answer, but like, what do you think the role of books is right now in this like political moment we're in? Like the role of like books and writing community.
Last September, I released Somewhere Beyond the Sea. I did an event in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is the Book March Festival. I was their keynote opening speaker, which, side story, imagine me sitting up there giving my speech in front of this entire church filled with hundreds of people, and I look down at the audience and frickin' Stacey Abrams is there, and she's laughing. Apparently she's a fan of mine. But I had to get to a point. So, then I gave my speech, and then afterwards, a gentleman came on stage to go back and forth with me. This gentleman on stage was a very big donor, a doctor, a very intelligent man in his probably 50s and 60s. And he asked a similar question to what you just asked me. And he prefaced this because I had, in my speech, had basically said J.K. Rowling is the devil. And so I wanted to, he was talking about, he has a non-binary 13-year-old. His non-binary 13-year-old recently discovered Harry Potter and was enthralled by it. And he asked me, what do you think I should do? And I said, don't you dare take a book from a kid. Don't you ever take a book from a child. Your child is 13. They know themselves to know they're non-binary. Present the facts to them. Tell them what the author is, what their beliefs are. And if they want to continue reading it, that is okay. Because you know what? They are a kid. Never take books away from a kid, ever. Books now, it's the most important thing, okay? Why? Every year for the last, 5, 6, 7 years, the American Library Association releases their top 10 banned and challenged books in the United States. Every single one is queer. Every single year. And not just white queer books. We're talking trans books. We're talking books by Black authors about the Black queer experience. Those are on that list. Why? Because They want to take the books out of the hands of the people who need them most. There's a book called Flamer by Mike Curato. It's a graphic novel. It is one of the most transformational young adult books that I have ever read. And it is one of the most banned books in America. If I had had that book when I was a kid, that book would have saved so much of my heartache, so much of my pain. There's a blurb across the top of that book that said, this book will save lives, and I absolutely 100% agree with that. This day and age, again, still, like it was in 2016, like it was in 2020, like it is now in 2025, librarians, teachers are at the forefront of a culture war that they want no part of, and are not paid enough to be even giving a crap about in this situation. But we still have people who go into libraries during Pride Month and check out every single queer book on the display because they think that'll keep other people from getting them, not realizing that librarians love it when you check out books so they can put more stuff on things. You know. So it is so important for us. I know we live in Washington. I'm speaking to an echo chamber here. We're very lucky where we live. My rights are going to be protected. I know that queer people in other places don't have that same assurance. Florida, Texas, the Bible Belt. How many, if you think about this, 2015, 10 years ago, same-sex marriage was legalized. Do you know what would happen if they overturned that? Like they said they weren't going to do with Roe v. Wade? Do you know how many marriages would... Say what?
My marriage would be gone.
Right. Marriages would be gone. Do you know how many states have anti-same-sex marriage laws still on the books? 36. So if Obergefell falls, all those marriages would be invalidated, and they would be banned again. Books let us walk in other people's shoes in other people's lives, and it is so important that marginalized creators, specifically queer, trans creators, get to tell their stories in only the way they know how. Do you know why they're getting scared? Because they know young people are coming up next, and young people are not going to take that shit. They are not going to take that shit. I've spoken to so many kids across this world. They are so much smarter than we ever were at their age. They are so much more empathetic, so much more worldly, and they know when their trans classmates are being targeted. They know when books are being removed from their schools. They're going to change everything. We just have to give them the time to get there. Thank you for listening to me blab. Hello! I like your vibe. I love Alex.
I love your bouncy foot. My foot's been bouncing.
Yeah, it's ADHD, man. That's all I do.
Well, that's actually my question. Thank you for talking about that openly, because it's tough as a writer, I think, sometimes if you're have a little attention problem. So I'm curious about your process in terms of being an ADHD human, maybe emphasis on the H, and trying to find a way to, I don't know, find a process that works for you.
Yeah. So part of my ADHD, for better or worse, is hyperfixation. I as a huge, like probably one of the biggest things, when I find something that I find interesting or fascinating or horrifying, what do I want to do? Read everything about it. And so what happens sometimes? Well, I'll start by being on one website and then clicking links and links and links and links until it's like 5 hours later and I'm nowhere near the original topic I was even thinking about. That happens a lot. But no, okay, so I have to be very diligent with myself. So, you know the meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia with Charlie standing in front of your conspiracy board, he smoked a cigarette like that? I have that board in my house. I have a board in my house that I have Post-it notes that I put up in a row for just what I'm working on for that day. But the biggest thing that I do, and this is excessive, is I outline like I'm not talking like, oh, here's 5,000 words on what I want this book to be. The House in the Cerulean Sea and Somewhere Beyond the Sea outlines are 100,000 words combined. And they're filled with stuff that does not go into the book. It's just meant for me. It's stuff like, what is their favorite food? What do they like to wear on weekends? What is their birthday? Stuff like that goes into the book that's helped me to know the characters. Last thing I'll say. I do all of my research before I start writing a book, because I don't want to get to a point in a story where I have to stop because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And I want to make sure that I have that momentum. Does that happen? Yeah, it will happen. And you have to account for that. And it's easy to get frustrated, especially when you're neurodiverse. It's very easy to get frustrated over stuff like that. But I know myself well enough now to know that what I feared as a kid that ADHD was me somehow being broken was absolutely not the case at all. ADHD is just me having something a little extra, and it's amazing. Thank you for that question.
I wanted to ask about your short stories.
Yeah.
Particularly, I know that Blasphemy and Blasphemy 2.
Oh boy! Oh no, we're about to corrupt some people. Okay. Yeah.
Kind of came out after a certain presidential era.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, unfortunately, now that we are back
If
in.
I'm gonna do the final third part of my Colorado trilogy kind of thing going on, yeah. So, uh-oh. Okay, so for the uninitiated, I sometimes release short stories for free on my website. Or lately it's been on with Reactor with the tour with like In the Legs of Puppet short story that I put on there. I wrote a short story called Blasphemy about a twink that seduces Satan. And there's a sequel called Blasphemy 2, Jesus Goes to Hell on Vacation. And deals with Jesus having daddy issues over the trauma of what his dad did to him. And by the very end, Jesus is engaged to a demon. And Satan, Jimmy, the twink, is engaged to Satan, and there's supposed to be a double wedding that I have not written that third part for. And in those stories, I make very and explicitly clear what happens to the Trumps when they die. So now that we're back in this era, I probably have to finish that, huh? I'll do that. There's people here going, I didn't know we didn't sign up for this. I thought this was the guy that wrote Chauncey. What is this?
Just seeing more sides.
Yeah, for real. No, trust me, those are not meant for anybody under the age of probably anybody. Under the age of 18, if you have a child and your child's like, oh, TJ Klune has a thing called blasphemy, you will have to answer questions that you are not prepared to talk about. Okay? So do not let your children read those, and maybe don't write yourself. Where are we at now? Okay, I see. Right here? Okay.
I also have a comment. You're right up there with like Lieutenant Aurora for me because it's the first time I've seen a character that I recognize myself in with Kelly Bennett. Thank you for the ace.
Oh, yeah. Hooray! Asexual people represent others.
The question I have is because there's a character in this book that's only in there a tiny little bit in one chapter, but you wrote an entire book about, and that's Benji. Will he get recredited his?
Okay, so thank you for asking that. So into this, the bones beneath my skin, as you start the book, and before Nate gets to the cabin, he stops at a gas station in a place called Roseland, Oregon. Roseland, Oregon was the setting of my 2014 novel, Into This River I Drown. These are the same places. And Big Eddie, the character that is met at the gas station in this book, is the center of the book Into This River I Drown, which takes place 2 decades later and follows Benji, Big Eddie's son. And yes, I can say that book is probably going to be re-released through my amazing publisher. So yeah, that book won the Lambda Literary Award. That was my first time ever winning a big award. And I was like, really? Into This River I Drown was me attempting to write a Faulkner kind of story. And so that's what happened with that book. And that book is, I love that book. Okay, so if you've read Under the Whispering Door, you know, and you've read the foreword or the dedication, you know I wrote that book after losing my partner, Eric. I wrote that book to try to understand the grief. So there was the soft grief in that book. Into This River I Drown is about the death of my father. And so it's a very different side of grief. It is a very angry kind of grief. So that's what In This River I Drown will be. And so we're probably looking at like 2026, 2027. But yeah, I think that's going to be re-released.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, because it's basically not a sequel, but a sidequel that follows some of the same characters that you meet in this book. Yeah, that's cool. Thank you for making that. That's cool. Yeah. All right, where are we going next? Okay, hi.
Hi. My question is, the very first time you were being published, what impact were you hoping to make, and how has that changed now that you have a more established audience?
Oh, that is a good question. So back in 2010, I decided, like most 20-year-olds, that I was going, or 20-somethings, that I was going to write the Great American Novel as my first book. I didn't know how to write a book. For some reason, though, I wrote a book in 2010. It was called Bear, Otter, and the Kid. It was my very big deal. I know there's some OGs in here, but it was my very first book. I didn't know what I was doing. I had this book inside my head, so I wrote it. And then I went online and I Googled gay publishers. And I clicked on the first one. And I submitted that book to them. And they were like, sure, why not? 8 months later, that book came out. A few months after that, Amazon was like, this is one of the best books published in 2011. And I was like, shit, man. And then I wrote a second book that was a complete heel left turn, and it flopped like crazy. It was awesome. So what have I learned? Or what is that what you write? What I learned?
I was asking what impact you wanted to have.
Oh, right.
How that's changed now.
When I wrote that first book, I said if even one person walked away learning something new, then I would have done my job. That's what I wanted. And I don't know that goal has changed, really. Because I try not to think of, my readership as like this undulating mass of people that is like staring at me currently. But I try to think of people as individuals, readers as individuals, and that you never know when somebody's going to need the one story that you wrote the most. I can, Under the Whispering Door, a story about grief, I can't tell you how many thousands of messages I've received with people sharing their own stories of grief. I've become like a secret keeper, in a way, for their own stories of grief. Why is that? Because it's easier to tell a stranger something hard than it is to tell something hard to somebody you love. And I'm very grateful, I'm very lucky and very privileged to have the platform and the opportunities that I've been given. Doesn't discount the fact that I worked my butt off to get here. But I still think of that. If one person picks up my book and walks away learning something new, or finds the story when they needed it the most, then I've done my job. That hasn't really changed. You're welcome. Isn't it crazy to think that I could be so much more egotistical? Okay, next question.
Hi, so I discovered you through the Green Creek series and Wolfsong really.
Yay, trauma!
I wanted to ask if you have a favorite character in your Green Creek.
Gordo, 100% always will be Gordo. Will always be Gordo. Gordo is an asshole, but Gordo is always right about everything. Think about it. If they had just listened to Gordo from the beginning, the Green Creek wouldn't have happened. Yes, he's my baby, and Raven Song is my favorite story out of that entire series because, when I first, Wolf Song I started writing in 2014. That's crazy. I'm so old. But Raven Song was the hardest book out of that series to write because I started writing Raven Song and I got like 50,000 words into it and I hated it. I hated what I was doing, and I realized why is because I was trying to make Gordo too much like Ox from the first book. So once I realized where I was going wrong and I just listened to Gordo and told that story, it just became my favorite because Gordo's anger isn't something that I don't always have angry characters as main characters, but when I do, boy, are they dicks. So, but Gordo is my favorite creation out of that entire series. Look, I love all of the characters in there, but Gordo will always be my number one. Yep, okay, hi. Oh. Oh.
I'm sorry, this is my first microphone. Not to add to the ego, more of a note, but your comment earlier about how having that book when you were younger would have done so much for you and saved you. That's how I recommend The House in Cerulean Sea to when I talk about that.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Trust me, if little kid TJ could see that he'd be doing this one day, he'd be thinking you're all crazy. But it's unbelievable. I would not be here without my readers, and that's with that. And the biggest thing. Look, I'm sure there's aspiring authors in here that hope to one day be published or maybe are on their own publishing journey. I'm going to tell you the biggest thing that could be on your side is word of mouth. If people like your book, they will talk about your book, and they will shove that book into other people's faces and tell them to read that book because they want to talk about that book with you. And if you don't read that book, oh no, here's another copy. Here's where she's at. Yeah, so I so appreciate it. It's why I don't think of you as one entity. I know you're all individuals, and I try to treat you as such. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Laura Rita?
Hello.
Oh, hello. Hi, back there.
Follow up to what you just said. What advice do you have for an upcoming author?
All writing advice that you hear from people is bullcrap. Because look, no matter who you ask, you're going to ask one person one thing what works, and they'll tell you, and you ask a second person, they'll tell you something completely the opposite. So I'm just going to be bare bones. Read as much as you write. Please read as much as you write. I have talked to authors that say they don't have time to read, and I say you don't have time to be an author if you are not reading a book. Focus on your dialogue. Dialogue, so important. Dialogue, why? Because you don't want to throw your reader out of a book because no human person speaks like that with their human mouths. You want to have your dialogue down. And you know what's a really good way to get dialogue down? Fan fiction. You want to know why it's good to try dialogue in fan fiction? Because A, you don't have to worry about the world building because the world is already built there for you. B, you know the characters, so you can focus on how you think that they would talk, and therefore you could learn how rhythm happens when it comes in conversations. Have you read a book where the people are speaking in conversation, and every other sentence somebody says their name out loud? That doesn't happen in real life. If you're sitting here with your partner, when was the last time you actually said their name out loud like that? You know? Right? That's not how it happens. And last but not least, don't write to chase trends. What's popular now is not going to be popular 2-3 years from now. However, if your heart is in that trend, let's say I'll just use romantasy for an example. If you want to write a romantasy because you want to write a romantasy, do it. But if you're wanting to write a romantasy because it's what's popular right now, don't. Nobody's going to care in 2 years when the trend is past. But if you write your story because you wanted to write it, people will notice and people will care. Thank you for that question. Read more books, please. Oh, one other thing. Read Stephen King's book On Writing. One of the best how-to writing books ever. I've gone through 3 copies and I still use it to this day. It is monumental. Hi, Chauncey.
Sorry, sorry.
No, you're okay. Go ahead. Take your time. You're fine. Don't worry.
Like Star Trek was like my favorite person.
Oh my goodness, I am so desperately uncool. You want me to tell you how before you ask the question, can I tell you how uncool I am? I just packed for a week-long trip. I put on 2 left shoes. I have like 3 pairs of black Converse, and I brought 2 left ones. I am desperately uncomfortable right now. The toes on this foot are like this. I'm not cool. Go ahead. Don't stare at my feet.
Okay, so I don't have a great question because I just really wanted an excuse to talk to you, so I just wanted something real quick. But I was just curious if any of your characters, like especially the kids in the Cerulean Sea book, are like based on the people you know in real life.
In a way, yes. Okay, so Chauncey is my favorite kid in the book. I love Chauncey. I actually made no qualms about my love for Chauncey. Chauncey exists, and Chauncey's whole existence exists because of the curiosity of children, as we talked about. Remember when you were a kid, and I'm speaking to you too because you're still a child, but remember when you were a kid and you found something that interested you so much it became your entire personality? Yeah. For me, it was Indiana Jones because I wanted to be Dr. Jones's boyfriend. I wanted to get into archaeology. I wanted to be an archaeologist because A, I thought that that's what you did. You would go and dig up treasures and have to run from boulders and punch Nazis and get a boyfriend named Dr. Jones. And so that's what Chauncey is. He is the childlike wonder that we have when you find something that you want it to be your whole personality, and that means Chauncey became a bellhop. He wanted to be a bellhop, so what did he do? He became a bellhop. That was his dream. And I will say that Talia is large, large parts of Talia are based upon my most wonderful little sister. She is. My sister Tori is a combination of Talia and Fee. And I could not ask for a better sister, even though when we were kids, she used to beat me up, even though she's like 2 years younger than me, and I was really tall and had a very large head. So, Lucy was going to always be an extreme, because I wanted the idea to filter in of nature versus nurture. What would that look like if a person whose nature was supposedly to be evil, what if they were nurtured by somebody like Arthur Parnassus? And Theodore exists because I got something in my head that I could not shake called receptive bilingualism. Receptive bilingualism is when you can't speak yourself in a certain language, but you can understand multiple languages. And that's what Theodore has. He has receptive bilingualism. He can speak Wyvern, and people around him can speak Wyvern, but that's his only voice. And who am I leaving out? Sal. Sal was big part me. Big parts of Sal were me, because I was the kid who didn't feel like they had a voice when they were a kid. And I was the kid who wanted nothing more to write. Authors put bits and pieces of themselves in almost everything that they do, because it's what we know, for better or worse. And our ego is like, hey, it's kind of like you. But that's why I do it with kids. So yes, some are based, but it's not entirely. It's mostly bits and pieces, like I usually do. What? David was based upon Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin and Hobbes is my all-time favorite comic strip. Bill Watterson is a genius of unparalleled legacy. And there's a very specific character that Calvin plays that is a private detective, Tracer Bullet. And when you meet David in Somewhere Beyond the Sea, what is he playing as? A private detective, because he is my version of Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
We're going to do about 3 more questions.
So we better make them good. Because people are going to be like, those last 3 questions were kind of bad. Really ruined the evening. Yes, where are we? Okay, hi.
Is it on?
There you go.
Okay, so I was at your book event at the Barnes & Noble for Somewhere Beyond the Sea, and I believe you said that you were writing it, and then you eventually changed it because you realized that Linus shouldn't be telling the story, it should be Arthur and like Arthur's voice.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, in general, how do you decide like which of your characters is telling the story, like whose voice?
Is the person who's speaking the loudest in my head. I had a choice growing up. I could have either been psychotic or a writer, because I hear voices in my head. And it really depends upon what character is the loudest. The loudest character that still exists to this day in my brain is Daniel Henning's narration of Chauncey. If you've listened to Somewhere Beyond the Sea or The House in the Cerulean Sea, the audiobook, imagine having that voice in your head at all times. But yeah, it really depends. Like with the Green Creek series, let's go back to that. I had to make that clear delineation between Wolfsong and the second book, Ravensong, because I couldn't write the second book with the way I was going with it. I was doing it wrong. I wasn't listening to the character. So that's what happens. I listen to the characters. Do I still make mistakes? Yeah, I'll be 30, 40,000 words into a story before I realize, oh crap, I have to do this all over again because I went with the wrong voice. It happens. I have like 2 or 3 novels written that are called so-called Trump novels that will probably never be released because I didn't have the right voice for it. I didn't find it. So just when you go to sleep tonight, just think, there's TJ Klune books that will exist that you will never get to read. Sweet dreams. Yeah, like Bird. I heard that. Okay, next question. Got 2 more. Hello.
Hello. I am enamored with your brain.
Oh.
And I remember hearing you speak one time about how you are that person who will have conversations with yourself in public and even as a random thought.
Yeah.
So my question is, what is the most disturbing thought running through your head right now?
Right now? Oh, really, right now? I'm wondering how my pinky toe is going to look as it's been like, am I going to pull off my pant and my shoe and my pinky toe is going to be like, I can't breathe! Yeah, so that's the most disturbing thought that's going through my head. And how I'm going to survive the next 6 days. And then I'm also thinking about if I could like somehow go online and order Amazon and have it like shipped to my hotel instead of my address, so I can and if I can just buy a right shoe. Okay, last question. Yeah, that's you. Hello.
Try the little button.
Push the button. I can do that. I push the button.
Hi, I'm like dying to know what Chauncey wears on the weekends, but I'm like deprioritizing that question because whenever I like get a book, I'm like, oh, do I listen to it or do I read it? So I'd like love to know about your relationship with like Daniel Henning, how you found this person like really bring your characters to life, and like what that would like to kind of give your characters to them.
Yeah, so Daniel Henning, I work with 3 narrators that I've worked with for many, many, many years. Daniel Henning, Kurt Graves, who does the Green Creek series, who did Under the Whispering Door, and Michael Leslie, who does my Extraordinaries series and my Tales from Verania series and a bunch of other books for me. I've worked with Kurt and Michael for at least 10 years. And I found them through auditions that when my first books were coming out, they were starting to get more popular. We started to get more and more people wanting to audition to take part. So I would listen to these auditions, and sometimes you're listening to hundreds of auditions of people reading the same thing over and over and over again. And so it got to the point where I just knew, click, this isn't the right voice, this isn't the right voice. I remember when there was a book that I wrote, there's a book that I wrote called Tales from Verania, a book series that I wrote called Tales from Verania. If you don't know what that is also not for children. I'm going to give you a 2-word description of the entire series. It's basically erotic Shrek. And there's a character in that book named Gary, who's a gay homicidal who has a lot of murder on his brain. And when I was auditioning for that book series, one of the narrators, or one of the auditioners, made him sound like George W. Bush. And I was like, no. And then I just kept clicking through, and I found Michael Leslie snapped into my head, and I heard his Gary voice. Kurt Graves, who does a lot of my books, the Green Creek series, first time I heard his Gordo voice, I knew that was him for me. Daniel Henning was different. When I got signed up with Tori McMillan, I did not know if I had power. Like, I didn't know if I could say, I want to use this narrator on this book that you just paid a lot of money for, please. And so I just kept my mouth shut because, don't want to make waves. And they came to me, Macmillan Audio came to me and said, I have this guy, his name is Daniel. He has 30 years of theater experience. Do you want to hear his audition? I heard his Chauncey voice, bam, sold. Why? Because there needs to be theatricality to that performance. You can't have somebody like Kurt Graves, maybe Michael Leslie could have done that, but Daniel, you need to have that theater background to be able to do something like that, to pull it off. Which, last thing I'll say for you all tonight, one of my favorite things about Daniel Henning, he's in theater 3 decades. He's a huge person in the queer scene in Silver Lake, California, in the theater district in LA and all of that. He tells you stories that are like lore drops about this person as an individual. He's like, yeah, when I was a kid, I would go hang out when my mom would always take me to go hang out at Bobby's house. I'm like, Bobby? He's like, Bobby De Niro. And I was like, oh, okay. Whatever. But Daniel Henning, before he started recording The House in the Cerulean Sea, you know what he was recording? College textbooks. So, Daniel Henning was recording books about like physics and math and other gross things. And I saved him. Okay, so it looks like we're wrapping up, and I'm going to shut up now, but thank you all so much for coming on this first stop of this tour. I get to go places with brown pairs of shoes now. And it's going to be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Please, thank you.